The sit-in outside the compound, which also includes the intelligence headquarters and the presidential residence, began a week ago after more than 3 months of protests triggered by a deepening economic crisis. While some protesters chanted and waved flags, others recorded signs on the protest movement, drawing women and doves on nearby walls.
Marking the history, and we reflect some message for the people. Because, now some people not afraid, but they are tired and they want to stay. And the people that didn't come to this place. And we try to ask them to come again. We are not finished. We are not finished. We still stay. Because the revolution not yet. We are not giving up until now.
The protesters demanded that the country's military rulers immediately hand over power to a civilian government. They also want ousted leader Omar al-Bashir brought to justice.
Freedom, more things to be happy in here, be all people happy.
At a meeting with political parties, the military council urged them to agree on an independent figure to be prime minister.
That story is also moving tonight. Latest developments this evening. Members of Sudan's Transitional Military Council have met the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Abiy Ahmed, about the country's ongoing crisis. The council is led by Sudan's Deputy Director of National Intelligence and Security, Jalal al-Din. Our correspondent Coletta Wanjoh joins us now from Addis Ababa. Coletta, good evening to you. What do we know about this meeting? Why would people from the Sudanese Interim Council go to Ethiopia as their first port of call?
Well, I think Ethiopia is very strategic. One, Ethiopia is the chairperson of the Intergovernmental Authority for Development, IGAD, of which Sudan is a member. And this bloc has about 8 member states. And Sudan needs support of these member states. So coming to Ethiopia was significant because they're coming to an authority of the regional bloc. And with their meeting with the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, we saw the Prime Minister congratulating or admiring the military support of the transitional government, but also emphasizing that this government needs to go to the civilians. So he sent them back after meeting them, sending them back to the civilians and telling them to go have an inclusive dialogue and make sure that the transitional government is led by civilians. And as this was happening, the African Union Peace and Security Council was meeting and they came up with almost the same decision.
Okay, I mean, we have all of these developments. It's a very fluid situation. Do you think that the Interim Military Council in Sudan are likely to take this advice to allow a government to be led by civilians?
Well, actually, they just held a press conference about an hour ago, and they reaffirmed that they'll still stay in power for 2 years, during which they expect the civilians to choose a prime minister. But they kind of emphasize and say that them staying in power is just for the sake of restoring or ensuring that sovereignty, peace reigns in the country and stability. But the day-to-day running of the Sudan government during this transition period will be done by the person whom the civilians will choose. And they also have assured that because there has been a call for former President Omar al-Bashir to be extradited, but to the ICC, but they say that's not in their making, and they'll not do that until a popularly elected government will take this decision. But we also note that the African Union has come down on them, and the African Union Peace and Security Council is telling them to step down within 15 days, lest African Union will suspend Sudan from the AU activities.
Okay, so we have all of this playing out. Do the African Union and the government of Ethiopia have that much influence on the new rulers in Sudan? We've seen plenty of cases where a military government comes in, promises a civilian government, and in fact that doesn't happen.
Well, the reality is there is nothing much that the African Union can do, because at the moment we know that a military solution cannot be, opted for Sudan from the African Union point of view. All it can do is give these threats and hope that the military council at the moment will feel that Sudan will lose a lot by not being a member of the African Union for a certain period of time if the military council does not step down. But also the best that can be done is for the neighbors of Sudan and the regional blocs where Sudan belongs to giving pressure to the military council. So it's about pressure, it's about more of verbal diplomacy, if we can call that. And we are bound to see more of this, because if Sudan does not have the support of the African Union and people let them to be as they are, then the civilians are going to suffer, and probably their protests may not get that much support as they want. So at the moment, the African Union is hoping that the military council will heed, and by 30th of April of this month, it will give back a report to see if the military council will have taken Sudan to the civilian hands, or decide what action to be taken.
And Coletta, when we've seen already, I think, 2 changes of power in Sudan and just over the weekend, is it possible to predict what's actually going to happen there? Could we have bigger changes? The protests are continuing. It seems that the Sudan Professionals Association is not going to let up the pressure.
Well, I think the advantage that the civilians in Sudan have is they are getting all this support, and getting support from the African Union that is speaking out. We have seen also the Troika, the US and other European countries speaking out and emphasizing that the civilians must be given their power. That's the advantage that the civilians have. And if that pressure is put, then the military has to concede to that. And the fact that the civilians inside Sudan are still staging their protests, and now we have the military council during their press conference saying that they're not going to touch the civilians, and the civilians can protest and stay around the state house as long as they want. They can continue protesting. So at the end of the day, the civilians in Sudan have continental and actually global support. And when the UN sits, the UN Security Council sits and probably discusses Sudan on Wednesday, we might hear a reiteration of the same thing: civilian-led political government, or a civilian-led political transition. And that's power for the people of Sudan.
Coletta, thank you very much indeed for you tonight from